Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily. It is Thursday, October 3rd, 2024, and today we're talking hedgerows, what farmers can learn from youth soccer coaches named Jesse, and how to be terrible at retiring from things. So let's do it. Okay, so it came up in several places this week that, wait, didn't you retire from podcasting, Jesse? So yes, a couple years ago, I said I was retiring from podcasting, and yet I have clearly not entirely retired from podcasting. Well, here's the story. After 3 years of doing the No-Till Market Garden podcast and writing a book and interviewing so many great farmers, all of which I loved, I decided to retire from that show and let a few other hosts do it for a few different reasons. First, because we were homeschooling at the time, it was a lot to ask of my wife to have to be the sole watcher of our then very young kiddos for multiple hours a day, trying her best to keep them from banging on pots and pans outside of my office door while I interviewed farmers. Also, getting interviews scheduled and then researching them and coordinating and then making sure that I actually got both sides recorded is a profound amount of work, especially while full-time farming and parenting and part-time coaching. Honestly, I must admit that I likewise didn't have all that many questions left to ask either. When I started the show, I had nothing but questions because there was just no info out there about how to farm this way. But over time, more content came out and more of my questions got answered. So it just started to feel, I started to feel somewhat satisfied, I guess, in that work and less curious. Yes, absolutely, farming is dynamic and complex, but a lot of it just boils down to use good compost, make sure the plants have the moisture they need, cover the soil to prevent weeds. That's like 90% of it. So not that 10% side of it wasn't interesting. I just didn't have that same fire and curiosity that I did when I started the show. And like I said, certainly there is a ton of nuance and a ton of nuance I could still get to. And I absolutely always loved chatting with farmers and hearing the nuances of their systems. But once that bold curiosity waned, I believed it kind of came through in the questions I asked and the way that I was presenting the interviews. It felt, at least like close to the end of my time with that show, that I was sort of just going through the motions. And in that way, I didn't want to waste your time as the listener, or certainly not the farmer's time who I was interviewing if I wasn't fully engaged with the information. It wouldn't be fair to them. It wouldn't be fair to you. Wouldn't be right. So although I pulled back publicly, I worked just as much behind the scenes in terms of, getting all these other great hosts in place and working on the videos in particular. That was a huge part of my time. I don't know if this is obvious to the average person, but videos are wildly time consuming, especially the types of videos I make with the research involved and tons of shots of me farming. Moving a camera around the farm can easily double the amount of work most tasks take. For me, I started putting that time into making the best possible videos I could, or at least informationally the best videos I could. Visually, I try. But similar to the podcast, I've kind of accomplished what I can accomplish for the time with that medium, with just making videos. My farm is not that complicated, and although there will be more Farmer Jesse videos in the future, to be frank, I don't have a lot more to say without just repeating the older video ideas over and over again. So it's kind of the same thing. I don't think that would be super fair to you. So like I explained on Tuesday, the thing I haven't done yet is something more in between. A podcast and video chimera, but also something more casual, more laid back, and slightly more broad in scope. I guess with fear of just repeating the video I did on Tuesday, because I was going to be doing something every day at 3 a.m. anyway, I wanted a new challenge and one that would keep me on my toes and curious. And because my kids are now in school, my wife and I don't have that same stress, really. Now that I'm only going to occasionally bring on a guest host and keep that conversation casual as well, I also don't have that organizational and research-heavy burden. With the No-Till Market Garden podcast, I felt like I had to have a new guest every single week. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't feel like I have to with this show. Expect some recurring guests. Expect me to kind of just call my farm buddies because I want an excuse to chat with them. Sorry, not sorry. So I guess I retired from one thing and started another, but at the same time, this show is a culmination of everything else I've been doing for the last, 6 or 7 years. To be honest, I'm entirely useless without a balance between doing something creative and doing something physical. I need something creative to do, like write or make videos or record a podcast, but I also need something to do with my hands for a large part of the day, like farm or fill the swear jar, which are often kind of the same thing. So no matter what it is I retire from, it will always, for me, mean that I will still be doing something creative and something physical. All right, with retirement out of the way, let's get to some listener questions from our Patreon members at patreon.com/no-till-growers right after this break. BRB. Today's episode is brought to you by Rimmel Greenhouses.
Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or your family's harvest, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment that you need for a harvest that you can count on. Rimmel greenhouses are designed for durability and offer the quality that you need to grow productively year-round. Visit rimmelgreenhouses.com to get a quote today.
If I may editorialize for a second, I own a Rimmel tunnel. I love it. We built it ourselves, and I really appreciated the quality of the tunnel as well as the customer service we received in the process. So make sure to check them out. All right, so don't forget that if you're enjoying this episode or have enjoyed a previous episode or think maybe a future episode will finally be the one, well, consider signing up to be a patron at patreon.com/no-till-growers and showing some support and helping guide this content. Not only will I shout out all new members of the month of October here at the end of the show on Growers Daily, but questions from Patreon members can be posted in the monthly show thread and float right to the top of my list of questions. In other words, I will always tackle those Patreon questions first and then get to the many other questions we get at Instagram or YouTube or at the forum at no-till-growers.com and so on. Today's Patreon question comes from Tiffany Sanders, who asks, what are the most common productive perennial hedgerow plant choices for the South? And Tiffany said they are in Florida, zone 8B/9A. Now, I'm not going to skip this question or avoid this question, but I am going to generalize it a little bit. There are many ways to approach hedgerows, and because I live in Kentucky and don't know the native plants of every region, it would not be super helpful for me to give you specific plants and specific species, but instead give you how I would go about it no matter what region I live in. First, you're going to need to identify some goals, and if you just want to say, I want to get all of the things out of my hedgerows, that's fine too. But here are some things that hedgerows can do. One, hedgerows can provide a wind block. On our last farm, we were on a ridgetop and the wind would blow heavily in the spring to the point that it was almost hard not just to work, but to be outside. So if we'd stayed on that property, the plan was to put in some dense evergreen shrubs to help block those early winds. Were also a problem in the summer when wind is usually not a problem because our deciduous forest here in Kentucky fill out and provide some nice wind block. But being so exposed there meant that wind even whipped through in the summer months quite a bit. So irrigation became kind of difficult, both keeping drip tape in place, but also making overhead watering effective. We use a lot of misting on our summer lettuce and if it's windy, it just blows the mist everywhere. So not to make this episode about wind, although I will take every opportunity to complain about it, wind also rendered that soil dry faster than other soils, which was nice in the spring or after heavy rain events, but was not so nice in the summer when I actually needed that moisture. Thanks. Anyway, wind is the worst. Thumbs down. Another thing you can use hedgerows for is shade. Honestly, that was another reason I wanted them on that ridgetop farm, especially given the general exposure of that area to the amount of summer lettuce I liked to grow. For that, though, something deciduous like fruit trees makes more sense because you only want that shade for part of the season, the hot part. A lot of sunshine can be a great thing if you have healthy soils because, well, sun is your energy source, a key ingredient to photosynthesis. And if you have good moisture and good carbon dioxide levels from microbes exhaling and burping and pooping away in your soil, then you can really maximize that sunlight. That said, basically any green part of the plant is capable of photosynthesis, so the leaves of trees and shrubs can help bounce sunlight down to the lower leaves of crops you are growing, thus further maximizing the sun. This is called diffuse light. It's kind of why we get better growth sometimes in greenhouses is the plastic diffuses the light down to the lower leaves of the plants. But other plants can do that as well in the field. Of course, sometimes a little shade is nice, if only to cool off the growers tending to the photosynthesis, preferably with a watermelon in hand. As a quick side note, I have become obsessed with growing seedless watermelon, so we'll have to talk about that at some point on this show. Now, hedgerows can also provide a crop like flowers and or fruit and or nuts and or maybe branches for plant material for a nursery, like I talked about with Blake Cothran in those YouTube videos I did with Peaceful Heritage Nursery recently. So you can watch those on YouTube, but yeah, you could use those to propagate new plants that you could sell to other people. So at least in theory, you could derive a lot of potentially marketable items out of the hedgerows. Then, of course, there are native trees, shrubs, and plants that attract specific pollinators and beneficials, which should quite honestly be a part of every hedgerow plan because, well, that's a pretty good place to put those kinds of plants. Plus, insect populations and diversity are crashing, so we need to help out where we can, and they may help protect your garden in some way. And then, of course, there is bug and animal habitat, which will come along with any hedge, but you could add small ponds for frogs or lower lying shrubs for snakes in places where the snakes are largely benign, like here in Kentucky, where we want to encourage all the black snakes and garter snakes and rough green snakes that we can, so that they will discourage all the snakes we don't really want, like copperheads and rattlesnakes and cobra commander. Okay, so start deciding based on what I just described, what you want out of your hedgerow or hedgerows. Then you take that list to the local native plant nursery and start chatting with them about what makes sense. That's the key to getting the best native plants, is to simply ask a local pro. I'm a huge fan of hiring pros or talking to pros in the area in which I'm deficient. Man, sometimes the verbal gymnastics one has to do to not put a preposition at the end of a sentence is amazing. Anyhow, yes, there are people who study the native trees and shrubs and plants in your area for their living. That's like what they do. That's the person you should contact, because it's not just that they can give you the right cultivars, but they can tell you how and when to plant them, how to care for them. Then maybe you can use those plants to propagate hedgerows for other farmers in the area, or just more hedgerows on your farm. Oh, and in terms of native plants of the South, just in the nerdy sense, there's a guy on Instagram who does an incredible job, who you should all follow. I think his name is Kyle Liebard. I'm great with names. If I remember, I will link him in the show notes, but his Instagram is @Native Habitat Project. Definitely check him out. All right, so I hope that at least gives you a starting point on hedgerows. And as always, feel free to add your 2 cents in the comment section or wherever you're watching this or wherever you want to. I check a bunch of different places. Next, we're going to take a quick break, another one, and then Coach Jesse has some thoughts to share on employee training. Yep, be right back.
Hey everyone, this is Clara Coleman, and I just wanted to pop in here real quick and say that if you're enjoying this show, you may also enjoy my own show, the Winter Growers Podcast. I interview growers from all over the world about how they produce year-round, especially through the winter months. We talk about the infrastructure, the mental and physical challenges, the tips and tricks, and I even include a thought-provoking lightning round of questions at the end of each conversation. You can subscribe to the Winter Growers Podcast wherever you get podcasts, or subscribe to the No-Till Growers Network on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for letting me jump in, and I look forward to seeing you there. Now back to your regularly scheduled programming.
Okay, so from time to time, I'm going to make a connection between sports and farming, and by from time to time, I mean probably a lot. Specifically, I would like to talk about coaching and how it relates to farming, or possibly how it doesn't, but could. So Coach Jesse is who I am in my regular daily life. People in my town don't really know me as Farmer Jesse, and I like it that way. Coaching soccer is something I deeply enjoy, and it challenges you in ways I had never really thought about it, and it also teaches you things that, as an employer, I wish I'd known. And I did use the past tense there because we don't currently have any farm employees, and that may not change anytime soon, but more on that for another show. We got time. And it will probably not surprise you that I am as nerdy about soccer coaching tactics and methodologies as I am about farming. Most of the summer, I am not listening to farming podcasts. I am listening to soccer coaching podcasts. And one thing coaches spend a lot of time talking about and planning for is coaching interactions. Literally when and how they are going to talk to their players during a training session, which training session is just coach speak for practice. Down to the numbers of seconds the interactions take place, coaches are thinking about how to relay information without bogging the kids down. I mean, you will see it still. Some coaches will spend 5 or 10 minutes talking to kids while the kids sit in a circle and spend the whole time saying, you need to listen to this, or are you listening? Spoiler, the kids are not listening. Not really, or they're at least not retaining very much, even if they look like they're listening. Professional coaches and psychologists will tell you that these sorts of interactions of lectures are largely useless and the kids will not retain very much of what is said. However, this isn't just about kids. This same reality applies to older kids and many, if not most, adults. Indeed, the thing I'm about to say relates also to professional players. Professional coaches use this same approach and keep their interactions really short. Most interactions should be 8 to 12 seconds long, and I mean seconds. So 8 to 12 seconds long, and then the kids should be right back out playing. Obviously, the older the player, the longer and more in-depth the mini lecture can be, but we all have mental limits. As an employee or just a helper somewhere, I noticed that I shut down after about 20 seconds and can't take more direction until I have attempted what I've been asked to do. For me, I need to do the task and see if I understand it and see if I have any questions. And so that way I have the context so that if I have questions, I can ask them to be clarified. As employers, we also have to recognize that it's hard to learn without context and that just explaining something to someone isn't a great way to teach it. Learning must happen in the field in the same way that learning a game, like soccer, must happen during some sort of play, not in a lecture circle. First, a soccer analogy and then a farming example. Let's say I want to teach kids how to properly defend another player who has the ball in soccer. What I wouldn't do is I wouldn't sit all the kids down in front of me and show them good defensive body position and talk about the key points to defending someone one-on-one and then start the drill. Depending on their age and mood, sure, they may be able to retain some of it, but most of that will be a waste of practice time and energy, not to mention they will start to associate boring lectures instead of fun with the game of soccer. Instead, what I would do is design a very simple drill, and if you're watching on YouTube, you can see what a drill looks like in this animation. And anyway, I would first lay out the activity, which is the modern word for drill, though I use both. I would lay it out on paper. Then when I get to the field early, I would lay it out on the field physically before the kids arrive. Indeed, if I'm planning 5 different training activities in a day, I have the cones laid out for almost all of them before the kids even arrive. Then I would lay the pennies out. Pennies are those little vests they wear to differentiate the teams they will be on during practice. They're like usually orange, yellow, red. I don't know why I'm naming colors. You know what a penny is. I lay them out exactly where I want the kids to stand. The players put on their pennies, and half of the explaining is already done because they are standing where I need them. So in this example, I may say I'm going to pass it to one player from that line and point to a line. A player from the other line, I'm going to ask you to try and stop them from scoring in this goal. Go. So I let them do that for a minute before I say, and notably while they are still doing the activity, I'm not stopping them. I say, okay, defensive player, make sure you run in front of the goal to protect it before running towards the player who has the ball. This is called curving your run. So I'll let them do that for a minute, and then I will switch sides and let the other kids who were on the offensive side do the defensive side. Then maybe I will give them a water break and then bring them back. I may ask them while they're getting back to their lines, why do we want to run in front of the goal before closing down the player with the ball? This is what's called a guided question. It gets them thinking critically about what we're doing. That would last just a few seconds, and then we would continue the activity. After a minute, I may stop the play for a second when the ball goes out of bounds and show the players what proper defending position looks like and how to force the player one way or another, or those little details. 8 seconds later, they go again, and I remind them in the flow to be mindful of curving their run and body positioning. In other words, instead of shoving all the details on them before the training session, I will slowly layer them in so they can digest each idea little by little and with very short but relatively planned interactions. Kids just want to play. As long as they are doing that, they are happy to learn a little bit too. However, and here's where you come in, this same or at least similar idea and approach can apply to farming and adult employees. Let's say you have a new employee and you want to teach them to harvest beets properly. The way a soccer coach might do this is first to identify and ready the equipment, bins and rubber bands, for instance, and perhaps have that employee help put them out in the field so they can see what the preparation looks like, but perhaps not. Perhaps just the first time you just do all that. If it's their first harvest ever of anything, just keep it simple and focus on the harvest details the first day. The second time, you can start layering the preparation details. Anyway, the soccer coach would introduce the task to the employee with just a very simple description, like, today we're going to harvest beets. What I'd like you to do is to harvest 5 to 7 beets in a bunch, wrap a rubber band around them, and then place them in the bin, dragging the bin behind you. Now, try a few with me, and I'll help guide you through it. Something like that. At this point, the coach, who so it's clear, is representing the farmer. Anyway, you would start pulling a few beets to demonstrate and put them in a bunch. Pull a band off your wrist and then go around the greens twice and then set the beet bunch in the bin, which makes for some good alliteration. You encourage them to give it a shot. Expect they will not do it well or right the first time, but allow them some time to try so they can have some experience and context to what you're teaching them. Oftentimes people know what they're doing wrong in a task. They just don't yet have the muscle memory and experience to change it yet. They need a couple times of screwing it up to figure it out. After you notice some things that would help them out, you just mention without stopping them, try to go around the beat greens with the rubber band instead of the beats themselves, because getting around all those roots can be a little wonky. Again, in soccer coaching, we call this coaching in the flow. We haven't stopped play, at least not for long. We have simply made a suggestion while the play was going on. Coaching in the flow is a very common coaching interaction, as is demonstration. And both of those things can be two things we can use as farm employers or people training, apprentices, volunteers, or whatever, to help layer in ideas. Then maybe once their bin is full, you take that as what coaches call a planned stoppage to correct something else. Like maybe they are piling the beats willy-nilly in the bin. Perhaps that planned stoppage is when you talk to them about how to properly fill a bin. Something like, great job, those bunches look great. For your next bin, maybe think about how to get more bunches in each bin. So I like this. So I like just stacking them nice and neat like this. And that way I can get 40 bunches in one bin. Maybe try that next time. And then when we get to the wash back, you will see how helpful that is for actually taking them from the field to washing them. But great work so far. Obviously, compliment sandwiches. That is starting your criticism with a compliment and ending it with a compliment are always a good idea in coaching, parenting, employing, spousing, all the things. But having that patience and not trying to correct every little mistake along the way will allow that employee to develop the context they need to do the task right eventually. That's the hardest thing. It really is hard to learn out of context. So I think as employers, we have to offer some context while we train our employees. And we cannot assume they will learn by being told. In a nutshell, it's about teaching more patiently and slowly in a fun way that's inviting, so someone can learn faster and more thoroughly overall. I feel like training new employees is one of those daunting things we all have to deal with as employers. So maybe having a training strategy like this could be helpful. I don't know. Or maybe not. I have no idea. You be the judge. Let me know what you think of my coaching advice for farmers at patreon.com/no-till-growers or at YouTube or Instagram or all the places. I think that's going to be it for me today. Please keep the flood victims of Hurricane Helene deep in your thoughts and pitch in wherever you can. There are still a few farms and farmers I have not been updated on, so hopefully they are all okay. What a true catastrophe this is in Asheville and surrounding areas. Whole towns are gone. Make no mistake, this is one of the worst American disasters in my lifetime and will be months before things get anywhere near back to normal there. Again, help out if you can, and we are sending our love to everyone in North Carolina and around. If you were watching the show on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe and share it with your friends. That sharing, it helps a lot. Make sure to share it. Hit that super thanks button as well. That helps a ton. Also, you can snag a copy of the Living Soil Handbook over at no-tillgrowers.com or a hat, or excitingly, Dan Brisebois, host of the Seed Farmer podcast, is coming out with a new book called The Seed Farmer next month, and you can pre-order it through no-tillgrowers.com. All those things support this work. But of course, the Patreon members are the centerpiece of our work, and I am shouting out everyone who signs up in the month of October and also anyone who bumps up from one level to another. So, shout outs today to Erin Worrell. Erin, she of Cedar Chest Farm. I will get Erin on here at some point. Also, she has a picture of herself with Taylor Swift. So, important Erin Worrell facts. Also, JCS and Zach Hardy. Big shout out to anyone who supports us in whatever way you can. Thanks, y'all. I'll see you tomorrow. It's Friday. TGIF. Fridays don't mean that much in farming, but TGIF. See you tomorrow.